Chers auditeurs,
Dear listeners,
bonjour.
welcome to Comdarchipodcast Season 6.
Saison 6, dans le monde fascinant des architectes.
And in the architectural projects.
Je suis Anne-Charlotte Deponte, passionnée d'architecture et docteur des universités en histoire de l'archi.
I am one of the spokespersons of Anne-Charlotte, who is a PhD in architecture history.
Merci.
Thank you.
D'être avec moi aujourd'hui.
To be with us today.
Et
And
maintenant,
now,
lundi en français, place au talent.
and Wednesday, let's talk projects. In English, of course.
Bienvenue dans Comdarchi.
Dear listeners, welcome to this new sport format from Comdarchi. This is Esther on behalf of Anne-Charlotte, author of this text. It's been a few weeks since I last put pen to paper to address you directly. The pace has been crazy, and I found it difficult to take the time to pause and reflect. And I missed that time. When was the last sport format? Well, it wasn't that long ago. On April the 21st, in Spot 19, I proposed the theme of places for selling, opening up the topic of the experiential. It's a vast program, which balances materiality, such as a wall, and immateriality, such as the web, like a pendulum. And this week, I had the honor of being invited by my former professor, Antoine Picon, to an event organized by the École des Ponts et Chaussées to celebrate his 40 years of research. I am very grateful to him. Antoine Picon has enriched with his powerful and insatiable curiosity and intelligence, and above all with his published works, the world of research on this articulation between materiality and immateriality. But above all, he wisely and tirelessly brings us back to this materiality. It was a very emotional moment for me to spend the afternoon of Tuesday, June the 3rd, 2025, in his company and that of the researchers who surround him. 30 years after my university years, which were intensified by his prolific and all too quickly passing classes. Our world at university was full of the promise of a new dawn. Today, yes, already 30 years later, in this meeting under Niemeyer's vault at Place Colonel Fabien, so many promises unfulfilled by politicians. So much ideology leading to hyper-violence. To a disfigured gamble. Gambled, or Paris in French, with a capital G and an S or not. To get to Antoine Picon, Place Colonel Fabien, the former headquarters of the Communist Party, there was no question of taking Line 2 and going via Stalingrad. I just grabbed a taxi. Never mind the cost. Hearing Picon speak is priceless. In the taxi, I chat with the driver, who is of Haitian origin and is fed up with driving through Paris here, definitely with a capital P and an S. The windows of his car are open, scheming the tents of the migrants, sheltering under the famous Line 2 of the elevated metro that runs through the north. I'm not really sure what's the least risky option anymore. And in the aftermath of PSG's European Cup victory, stolen by hordes of savage and destructive people, the friendly Haitian taxi driver and I discuss our family values, the madness of what this public space has become, its danger at any moment. And what is most revolting, this feeling of scum-like impunity, while the rest of us, poor, hard-working sinners, have to pay through the nose for our honesty, But also this public space where women can no longer really walk around freely and peacefully, right? Digression. It's up to women to ask themselves the right questions, because certain excesses led us, by simple logic, straight to extremes, which, at the end of this slow agony, will come as a surprise in Technicolor, unless we have a real wake-up call. I will always defend the cause of women, but above all, I will do so without simplistic views, labels, and castrating absurdities, and certainly not by colluding with the worst regressions. When here, our mothers, yesterday, throwed off their headscarves and won the right to vote that you enjoy today. But should we still believe in this awareness? So many trendy ideas defended by spoiled people who have nothing else to grant themselves the most human virtues. My friend, so many trendy ideas that are rotten to the core. It's time for the woke cyst to burst. It has rotted the brains of too many of our children, and sometimes even their bourgeois or post-bourgeois parents and grandparents, who are soft, spoiled, and or stupid, and all that jazz. Let's shake ourselves up. This is urgent. The people are suffering. And I am one of them, by the way. It may surprise you, but it's the truth. And this voice that I now share, I owe only to the extraordinary cultural heritage that I think I have been able to observe and recognize, and to my hard work. For the rest, apart from my brave husband, I am rather toothless, you see, but still capable of giving. We, the destitute, don't care about our politics, which are dictated by the soles of our shoes, and stop the impunity that violates our innocence. Moreover, it is likely to turn first and foremost, and undoubtedly severely, against those who, in succession, pronounce the non-sentence without conscience. Once again, it's just logical. History must serve as our guide. Remember the days after the French Revolution. Finally, without believing that today's hypocritical, lying, and poorly acted TV series will help you understand history. Open up the books with real references, and let's get back to the debate instead of listening to the cries of the protected few who hand out labels, while, paradoxically, the screams of terror are rising. So yes, that's why, at the end of this day, June the 3rd, I appreciate so much the conclusion of one of the school leaders. We need this humble and brilliant intelligence, that of an Antoine, for example, who has the art of sweeping away fashionable ideas with a few powerful and gentle phrases. This heroic teacher, who brilliantly won and kept his freedom, an agile rock, unavoidable in the midst of dogmatic boundaries. I loved the way he articulated the idea of the necessary adaptation of cities to change, via Mother Nature, but without her undesirable scourges. This step back in the face of potential setbacks. The pendulum obliges. In this pendulum swing, under Niemeyer's vault, I praise the words of someone who has always kept the builder's imagination alive, who would never pit the past against the present, as some ill-informed, not to say culturally ignorant, members of Madame la Grande's entourage do, for whom the only culture is that of the past. I'll leave you to guess who Madame la Grande is. Yet, it is creative magic that ultimately drives Antoine Picon. Here, we will not be weighted down by the art of the engineer or the architect, two disciplines that in France have constantly been at loggerheads. Antoine Picon is both and more. He is multifaceted, a historian, certainly not in the insurmountable at the same time sense, but like the embodiment of a pendulum, a symbol of renewed calm. It is this inventive alchemy that we must achieve in the face of today's challenges. And he is one of the few who knows this and is capable of bringing the idea to fruition. Yesterday, we were talking about reconstruction. Today, the term reinvention is on everyone's lips. For my part, I do not believe in reinvention, but rather in this inventive alchemy that will never start from nothing. I pray that the pendulum will swing back and set things right. Niemeyer's amphitheater is certainly fabulous. It sprang up like a mushroom thanks to ideology. An ideology which, however, we cannot remind ourselves often enough, led to crimes committed on a global scale by communism. Gulags, famines, arrests, purges, invasions, repression, labor camps, deportations, imprisonment, military interventions. So, thanks to the energy of the pendulum, may the builder's imagination remain. But may the Dr. Strangeloves destroy themselves once and for all, and leave us in peace. The era of reconstruction and the baby boomers, so decried by young people, nevertheless gave rise to incredible initiatives that were nothing short of inventive alchemy. Niemeyer's genius is proof of this. But here, again, the French hold the record for self-denigration. And I will explain why with an example. Because, let's repeat, the best thing would be to look back factually in order to move forward better in the present. Let's take a look back at a story that has been in the news in recent weeks. The story of Nyre, or the Groupement pour l'étude d'une architecture industrialisée, Group for the Study of Industrialized Architecture. I discussed it in my thesis. It has resurfaced in an interview with Pierre-René Lemas, conducted by Tina Bloch, entitled Les Lods de Grand-Mare, Sale Destin. The Lods of Grand-Mare, A Dirty Fate. It's true that this large industrialized housing complex, known as Nyre, built in the late 1960s, was a dream of white-glove construction and commonly referred to as les lods, even though my late uncle, Paul, and the third associate architect, Henri Beauclerc, also put all their skills into it. All three of them, as partners since 1965, had signed this avant-garde architecture, which is still criticized today. Lodz was the driving force. Henri Beauclerc followed in the footsteps of his master, Paul de Pont, known as the American, on whom Lodz could rely to reintroduce metal into his practice. I remember my uncle telling me with hindsight that the only mistake at La Grand-Mare was to have produced, in a major social housing program, an experimental and sophisticated architecture that deserved all the attention it received and was more in tune with the minds of the elite. Although asbestos was also a serious mistake in his opinion, and one that was imposed on them. In this interview article in Chronique d'Architecture, dated May the 13th, 2025, I quote, "However, the system quickly showed its weaknesses. A series of fires began in 1981, without any real explanation. there was no fire resistance. People died. End of quote. I remember that it was pointed out that some residents were using the ceiling spaces as storage areas for questionable products, which it seems was prohibited by the regulations. I would like to mention this in passing. The article continues. However, 3 buildings were listed as historic monuments in 2010 for their obvious architectural and technical interest. Then, in 2011, a report by the General Council for the Environment and Sustainable Development produced a report entitled What Future for the Lodz? This was the beginning of a very long end. End of quote. The end in France, you mean? Because, excuse me, did you know that there is a counterpart to this operation in Chicago, which has been renovated twice in 50 years, but is still intact? And yet, these are still social housing units in the US. In fact, the density had been increased. And the finesse of the structures built in La Grande-Mare is not quite the same, as this is a version adapted to American steel construction methods. When I visited in the early 2000s, it was home to a Black community in such a sensitive neighborhood that Bill Wallace, my uncle's associate architect on the project, who was himself African American, was afraid to venture there. We went there, only Bill was scared. We were perhaps unaware, motivated by Paul, and yet, in the end, we were warmly welcomed on site. And the 500 homes are still standing today. So, is it really the fault of steel? Or is it the fault of Lodz, who, according to the Chronique article, forgot to make a city? Yet it was already low-rise buildings in a generously planted environment. It was more of an Anglo-Saxon city design that had proven itself elsewhere. Is it the fault of the fires? Sorry, but Chicago proves otherwise. Is it a dangerous heritage? It's mainly because in France we don't know how to bring together expertise in metal frameworking, and we hide behind a plethora of rules. What's more, we're much more adept at headlines and punchlines than seeking historical truth. It reminds me of an article in Le Parisien that denounced asbestos in the 3M Tower in Cergy to silence the residents. This was a lie. There was very little asbestos in the 3M Tower, and the tower's metal structure was equipped with sprinklers. In fact, my uncle from America managed to get around the asbestos removal from the structures following the Grande-Mare experience. Now, instead of 3M and its park, the ground is covered in concrete. Well done, France, with its preconceived ideas and anti-historical theories. That said, I'm not saying that the Grande-Mare operation replicated in Chicago is a good example, primarily for reasons of density, because real block buildings were incorporated there in the USA. Even if they are all well received over time, they are not exactly attractive in the landscape, to say the least. Or perhaps it is the lack of resources in the economic models at the heart of the project that do not seem to allow these architectural processes to be fully optimized. Finally, on one side of the Atlantic, like a pendulum, they still provide housing for 500 families, and there are no plans to demolish them. And we may criticize the US, but in this example, they saved on materials. Here in France, on their deathbed, they are still being denigrated by a narrow-minded few. And that's a shame. In 1979, during the heyday of the newspaper Le Monde, Jacques Michel wrote more accurately in his article Le Balancier des Villes, the pendulum of cities, and I quote, "The ebb and flow of these urban changes is the story, unfortunately poorly visualized here, of the last 35 years of architecture and urban planning in France, during which we have probably built more than in centuries." He concluded with, "Unfortunately, however desirable it may be, this attempt to restore a little more architectural quality to housing is far from answering the question of its quality in general. In reality, it conceals it. A very limited number of experimental models are allowed. And here I say in parentheses, therefore. But nothing is done to prevent the flood of industrialized single-family homes, of appalling architectural poverty from covering the territory of France." End of quote. And since this publication, we have been going on for nearly 50 years, and nothing has really changed. And now, precisely because of the issue of resources, are we going to have to put up with this endless drivel dictated by profit? Probably, for the most part. So, in the midst of a social crisis, everything seems to indicate that we must not give up on inventive, constructive alchemy. That we must not hide behind DIY and other precarious scaffolding or fashionable ideas. Starting from the real life of the inhabitants is all well and good, but it will never eliminate the ultimate art of projecting into space, of which architects are the guardians. On the contrary, we must continue to investigate, always, and be happy to see that in a school such as the EPFL in Switzerland, for example, progress is still being made in this field. A word to the wise. This text, of course, is solely my critical opinion for once. You will have understood that if architecture is political, I do not particularly appreciate politics and what it has become. Once again, I dislike labels, and I am more interested in mechanisms. Dear listeners, thank you for listening. See you next week for a new episode, at least for those of you I haven't scared off too much with my diatribe of the day. But it's important to set the record straight from time to time. And what do you think? Until next week, take care and goodbye.
Thank you for listening.
And thanks to the sound engineer who was collaborating with us today.
Don't forget to tune in to our previews on Instagram at comdarchipodcast. If you enjoy this podcast, don't hesitate to promote it by giving it 5 stars and a little comment on Apple Podcast or on your favorite podcast platform. And above all, subscribe to listen to all of our episodes for free. See you soon, and until then, take care of yourself.